Now, we had the Māori child in that propaganda video, but we also have Te Pāti Māori in the House of Representatives every other day talking the most ridiculous nonsense you've heard all year. You see, they don't really care about the truth. They don't really care about acting in accordance with what a common, decent person would. No, they care about being explosive. They care about being dramatic. They care about appealing to a very certain subsection of the population. And they do so because if they want to get the revolution they want, well, they have to appeal to people who are prone to being radicalized, people who are willing to fight back against the threat that Te Pāti Māori claims exists. So, for example, they'll talk about our current government and say that the current government wants to exterminate Māori, which is very odd considering that the Deputy Prime Minister is Māori and that this is one of the most Māori-heavy governments in the history of our nation. But, we can move away from that. We simply have to acknowledge here that they will say absolutely anything to advance their point of view. They will say anything to advance their position. Right, and this is the dangerous part. They will say anything and they will likely resort to any means to achieve their goals. Now, of course, their end game is that they want to basically separate themselves from the crown. They want to separate governance of this nation into two groups, people who come under the crown and people who come under the Māori Parliament. The Māori Parliament would be for everyone with Māori descent, and if their policy is anything to go by, if you are Māori, you do not have a choice. You have to go under their rule, and you don't have a choice in that matter whatsoever. That's at least according to their policy, because their policy it doesn't state to the contrary. So this is the concern here. I know what we can see very, very clearly what they want. The problem is how they're going to go about it is inherently divisive and could lead to some very dark times ahead for this nation. So a prime example of this radical rhetoric in our parliament is from one of their newer MPs, Miriameno Kapakingi. And, well, this is probably another justification to get rid of the Māori seats, because in absence of the Māori seats, such a radical with such divisive and, quite frankly, repugnant views would not be in our parliament. So what has she had to say in recent weeks?
The parties of the government have doubled down on the extermination agenda for Māori. My use of that word, hold tight, my use of that word made a lot of you uncomfortable, and I'm glad to hear it. The repeal of Section 7AA is a targeted extermination of our babies. Hold tight, don't have feelings yet. Exterminating any ounce of culture, identity, and any sense of their Māori selves. What many don't have the cultural intellect, despite any other intellect, to understand is that a Māori person is different to a Pākehā. Moana Jackson in He Whai Pānga Hou said, a Māori person is shaped by cultural forces which are unique to their being Māori, and is subject to influences which are consequent upon that sense of Māoriness. So I speak to all the Māoris in this room. Let that sink in. Let that sink in. And if you don't, you've declared to the whole House who you actually are.
Recently in the House, she stated that the government has doubled down on their extermination agenda of Māori. And then she goes on to say that she sees that it made many people in there uncomfortable and that she's glad to see that we're uncomfortable. Now, of course, she's glad to see that we're uncomfortable because it allows her to play into this idea that, white people or people opposed to her party, people opposed to her position are trying to reject history. That this is an act of oppression by pretending that this is some nonsensical thing, or that it is an inherently defensive move to feel uncomfortable, and that by feeling uncomfortable, it suggests that there is validity to what she's actually said. And she simply has absolutely no regard for the kind of language she's using, which is very, very much inflammatory. She's stating that the repeal of Section 7AA in the Oranga Tamariki Act is the act of exterminating Māori through the erasure of their culture and their identity. And the reason for that is because it would mean that no longer do we prioritize culture over the well-being of children. Because that's essentially the reason why the Section 7AA within the Oranga Tamariki Act is being repealed, because it allowed, or at least it increased the likelihood of reverse uplifts, which means, let's say a child is Māori and they're adopted, or not quite adopted, but in care, I should say, foster care, and they're with a family that is non-Māori. Let's say they've been with them a couple years, which has been the case in some of these instances, and they're in a very loving household. They're doing very, very well. By the looks of it, they're going to go on to great things. But Section 7AA, all of a sudden, the social workers in question and all of the people involved with the Oranga Tamariki making these kinds of decisions have a look and realise, we've just realised that there's this Māori family that is distantly related to them. And because they are Māori, if we do not put them with this Māori family, even though they're in a very, very good household now for the last couple of years, if we don't put them with this Māori family, well, then we're erasing their culture, that we are failing them, that they will not be successful, because it's Māori culture which allows Māori people to be successful. And it is inherently genocidal to not place a Māori child with a Māori family, even if the family that they're with, which was escaping from their dysfunctional Māori family, is one that is actually good for them. It doesn't matter how well they're doing in school, doesn't matter how loving the family is. No, we will remove you from that family, and we will place you with distant relatives like you've never met them, and we'll just roll the dice, see what happens. In some cases, in at least one case that I know of, I believe it was a girl. She was with a family that was non-Māori for quite some time, was doing very, very well. She was removed from that family, placed with a distant relative who happened to be Māori, and she was abused. She was placed with the non-Māori family because of abuse. She was removed and then faced abuse again, and she was only removed because she is Māori, and they decided that white people can't look after you, or whatever ethnicity that family happened to be, because only Māori know how to look after Māori. That is the core reason why Section 7AA is being repealed, because we want to reduce the likelihood of ridiculous decisions like that happening. Prioritizing someone's ethnicity and their culture over their well-being is, quite frankly, barking mad. And they'll sit there and argue that, oh yes, but being embraced within your culture is part of your well-being. Sure. But if I am doing very, very well, and I'm going to go on to live a very successful life, why place me with people who have, quite frankly, no ability to provide better than what I already have? Especially because when you do grow up, you have the ability, especially if you're doing well for yourself, especially if you're in a good place, to go and embrace your culture. Like, for example, right now, people may not know this. I am Māori by heritage, or at least one element of it. And I've grown up, for the most part, with absolutely zero exposure to it. In recent years, I've learned a lot more about it. And I'm one of the only people in my family that embrace it to the level that I do. For example, I'm very, very proud to state my iwi, which is Te Whānau Apanui, whereas no one in my family really mentions that at all. And hey, I can make the deliberate choice now as an adult to go learn more. I could go to a tikanga course tomorrow, and I've dabbled on that in the past as well. You know, I've spoken at Pōhiri before, in Māori. You know, these are things that are available to me, despite the fact that I wasn't, strictly speaking, raised in a family which even discussed Māori culture. And that wasn't because my family is anything against Māori culture. That's simply because, for the most part, we were a European family. I mean, my mum's parents were British. my dad's parents were, whilst on this occasion having to have the Māori line connected, were still South African and Scottish. So, I mean, you know, for the most part, I am European, and that's quite apparent when you look at me, isn't it? But that doesn't stop me. That doesn't stop me in my adult life embracing my culture, because I'm allowed to. There are many, many elements of my culture, of my ethnic background, which I have even less exposure to, even less knowledge of than Māori. So if in order to succeed, you need to be embraced within your own culture, well, then I'm doomed to fail because there is so much about my ethnic background that I'm absolutely clueless about. There is so much about the culture related to my relatives from Eastern Europe that I'm absolutely clueless about. So the whole premise that the Pāti Māori like to approach this argument from is not only done in a way that is inherently divisive, but it's not even based on reality at all. And Kapakingi essentially finishes by not only calling the entire parliament a bunch of people that lack intellect simply because they don't agree with her, but they lack cultural intellect, which whatever the hell that means. But, outside of that, she doubles down on the idea that Māori are driven by cultural factors, whereas apparently no other group of people are. No other people are based on their culture. I mean, literally that's what differentiates cultures, is the differences in culture and how those cultures shape how you live. I mean, there's a very real reason why there are certain standards of discipline in, let's say, Chinese households relative to that of let's say, an English household. The standards, the cultural differences are there for all to see. I live with my dad at the moment, as well as his Thai wife. Now, she has very different expectations of someone my age and what position I should be in based on the cultural expectations in her home country of Thailand. And that's not because it's the only way to do something. For example, if I was living in the way that is expected in Thailand, I mean, sure, I'm very much sure I would be in a different position. The point being is I don't need to live one way or the other. I need to live in a way that works for me, works to advance my life, works to improve my quality of life and my well-being across the board. Do I need to rely solely on a culture related to myself to do that? No. Just as Māori don't need to rely solely on Māori culture to succeed, that would be utterly ridiculous. To suggest that one culture has a superior way of living is basically the grounding of every ethnic supremacist movement ever. And sure, she may say, oh, yes, but this only applies to Māori. So, for example, we don't expect non-Māori to live this way. We just expect Māori to live this way. Okay, and why don't you expect non-Māori to live this way? Well, I would imagine the argument is because, well, they're not Māori, so they can't have the same relation to, this as us. That being said, the issue with her position is that it simply is not based on facts. There is not one set way for a human to live. Humans are very, very diverse. And it's, for that matter, pretty much every single Māori you'll meet is not just plain, simple Māori, are they? And last I checked, we dictate what we are. We dictate what culture we want to, adapt to. So, for example, tomorrow I could move to Japan if Japan wanted me, of course. And I could decide for the rest of my days to live very much in accordance with Japanese culture. I may thrive doing so. It is all about individual choice, and the government should certainly not dictate what culture someone grows up in. They should dictate only if a family is extremely, extremely dangerous to a child, and whether or not that child needs to be taken care of in an environment that is not dangerous. And that is fundamentally the point of uplifting children from families and taking them to new households. Reverse uplifts decide, we don't care if the household's good for you, we're going to remove you anyway because you don't have the right cultural views. But if I'm completely honest, I don't actually think Te Pāti Māori cares all that much about Section 7A8. No, it's just a very, very great opportunity to advance their cause, which is to implement a segregated society. Not just segregated by you can't go into this place and you can go into this place. Segregated by law. As in, we can both walk down the street at the same time, sure. No problemo. However, I've got one set of laws and you've got another set of laws. My laws are dictated to me by the Crown and your laws are dictated to you by Māori. Or the other way around, because obviously it's Māori that want this, or at least Te Pāti Māori that want this. And this is the problem. They want to implement a system a bit like the systems that you see with the UK, where you've got Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales with their own devolved powers in their national assemblies. But the reason why that works and it's not segregation is it's within certain boundaries, right? Scotland's a actual region, Wales is a region, Northern Ireland's a region, and every single person, regardless of ethnicity, if they are within that region, the law applies to them. No, what Te Pāti Māori wants is, one, either for every bloody Pākehā to ship out, and that kind of solves this issue, but they want to have the laws that they make apply to Māori and Māori alone, the systems in place to apply to Māori and Māori alone, and for everyone to live in the same place. We're talking husband and wife could have different rights under the law, which, funnily enough, breaches the very document that Pāti Māori will cite justifies doing this.